Welcome to the Bill Cartwright Show with Steve Cohen. Our special guest tonight is Angel Iscovich. I hope I pronounced that right.
Good, thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be on the show.
Now, we're going to get to your book, The Art of Routine, and I'm a very, very big fan of routine and just getting myself organized every single day. But before we do that, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? I'd love to know where you grew up. And what I really love is tell me about your parents a little bit.
Sure. I'm a physician. That's my background. Getting there, I was born in Argentina to parents that immigrated after World War II, both of them being concentration camp victims, my mother being in Auschwitz, and both ended up immigrating to Argentina, where my mother's parents had been before the war. And that's where they met, and that's where I was born, my brother was born. But when I was about 7 years of age, it was a kind of a rough go, and my parents decided, my dad being a little spontaneous in his approach to life and maybe impulsive, decided to come to the United States. And we were able to get a sponsor at the time. At that time, you needed a sponsor. And I was a small kid, so I didn't know much of what was going on. And Spanish was my first language. And they took $100 and a couple of valises, a red and a blue one, I remember, and somehow ended up and landed in Los Angeles. So I ended up growing up in Los Angeles and quickly learning the language, and coming from a little bit of a rougher neighborhood, had a little fun made of me and had to kind of grow up a little bit quickly, and got involved a lot in sports and in the Los Angeles area, and eventually ended up going to college and being interested in philosophy. And so that's what my background and my parents' background.
Tell me about now. Where'd you go to college?
Well, I actually went to a small school called the University of Puget Sound up in Washington, and it was interesting because I went on a baseball scholarship, and at the time they just won the Division II national championship, but nobody knew about them, and they went Division I the next year. But I had some good opportunities to go to USC and Arizona, but I was just couldn't wait to get out of Los Angeles. I was just ready to leave, and I became really impressed with the great Northwest and the big Mount Rainier, and that whole environment was something new for me, and ended up going to school up in the Northwest.
So tell me about what you studied, and tell me about your first job coming out of school.
Wow, well, that's interesting because my dad told me that if I don't keep at school, that I have to go to work. So I thought, wait a second, I got to keep studying here. And so I pretty much went straight through college for 3 years. Although I did work at Hamburger Patty over in La Cienega Boulevard and Beverly there in Los Angeles in the 1960s, and ended up going to school and kind of finishing more or less in 3 years and having an interest for a little bit in philosophy and being a teaching assistant in philosophy. But I somehow became interested in medicine and ended up then going to medical school.
So what did you study at medical school? Very curious.
Well, medical school, it can be a little bit of a grind, and it was interesting because obviously in medical school, some of the first things that you're exposed to, and I went to medical school at the University of California, San Francisco. The UC Parnassus campus, right in San Francisco, was kind of like the Berkeley Medical School. It's a healthcare campus. And it was like coming back to LA, back into San Francisco, into a big city. And it was a great exposure because you were able to have great diversity of people. I hate to say a lot of good disease, but that's what you're trying to learn. You're trying to learn about disease and the sort. And obviously learning about the human body and physiology, and my interest kind of in behavior. Those were really kind of important, I think, landmarks of my interest at the time through medical school. And that led me to postgraduate training, which I had started really in psychiatry because I had an interest, but I was also a little bit of an immediate gratifier, and I became interested in emergency medicine. And At that time in 1979, emergency medicine was just becoming a new field, a new field of practice. It actually, prior to that, if you went to a community emergency department, you might have had the psychiatrist or the dermatologist check you out. You know, everybody rotated. So my interest in behavior and then into emergency medicine led me to a pretty, long 25-year career in emergency medicine.
So as you went through that, um, what really attracted that to you? Because it's behavior is a big part of sports.
Right.
Being cooperative, and but more importantly, understanding people. So what did you really learn from that?
Well, interesting because there were a lot of number of factors that at this point in my life led me to kind of writing the book, The Art of Routine. But I think one was, having been involved in sports, how teams are able to function, how having been kind of in leadership positions in the past, how do you work together as a team? And in situations such as emergency departments, you're dealing really with the worst of situations for people, and situations which are kind of unknown, uncertain, not too different than the pandemic, which we've just had. And so you don't know what's coming through the doors, and you have to, as the emergency physician, the leader of the team, the nurses and the sort, be ready to handle most any situation. And particularly, cardiac traumatic situations, which is and trauma, which are the two key factors in being an emergency physician. But that's what attracted me, is how do you lead in these very stressful situations? How do you perform? How do you do a good job? And I think that kind of built a lot of my thinking as I, come, years later to now thinking about human behavior or human nature, and kind of an insight into that. And I've seen that, of course, in sports and high performers. I've seen it in people who live long lives. And that was, I think, a key point of doing emergency medicine leadership, I think, and my putting together my interest in behavior. And in essence, how do we best survive in the environments that we're in?
I think, I've been letting you, Angel, just kind of describe what you've been doing. But I think one thing that we wanted to have you on here is just, why did you get so interested in routine? Like, what made you really want to do it, and how does it apply to NBA players like Bill?
Well, obviously in having a bit of a sports background, but it really, what interested me in routine, I mean, first of all, was that I was kind of viewing the world in the last couple of years and noticing how we're kind of in an age of infinite disruption right now. We're getting interrupted with lots of digital data, whether it's television, video, cell phones, and the sort, right? And it got me really to thinking about how important it is, both physiologically, how our bodies work, both physiology and endocrinology, that our bodies have a lot of rhythm, a lot of regularity. Whether it's the circadian rhythms, which we know real well about when you awake and when you perform best, to postprandial tides, when you get sleepy, after eating, to when you go to the bathroom, and all of those kinds of things. And I began thinking that kind of the perception of the life that we live in, watching the moon go up, the sun go down, and the sort, had a lot of regularity, a lot of routine. And it seemed that many people that have been in distress, that I often have a chance to talk to or ask me for their help, or people that are in need, behavioral or otherwise, have a disruption and do not have regularity, do not have rhythm. And we kind of go through life trying to create the way our bodies are, homeostasis, equilibrium, stability in what we do. And then things burst. That's why I got these little time bubbles here. We kind of live in little time bubbles that burst, and we kind of come back. And when you start applying it to high performance in sports in particular, and you start to observe who are the high performers, how teams perform well, you begin to see how important doing things regularly, and there's science behind all this, and doing things timely, and having both a routine, which for teams occasionally become rituals, and for individuals can become superstitions. But how these kinds of things then help performance. And there's science behind how our midbrains work, how we learn, and whether it's like the situation with how do you get in a bubble to shake the crowd off so so nothing's bothering you when you're shooting free throws. How does that become automatic, for example? And I think, in sports, we've seen a great example of what I talk about, which is um, so to speak, the time bubble, which the time is this urge of us to find stability. I say time is what we do, but not necessarily what we do, but the regularity of it. And the bubble is really the environment that we're in. And I think you saw a very interesting thing play out here with the NBA in particular, when here we come under a social distress, a pandemic, and some smart people understanding their body and wanting to keep, basketball alive, figured out a way to find a stable environment and find a routine and a way of doing this, as they did at Disney World and the sort, and learned how to survive through a pandemic, through a stress and the sort. So those are a couple of things that I talk about. Mm-hmm.
No, I read the book. I recommend it to anybody. I thought it was a terrific book. I think that the NBA bubble went a lot better than people could have expected. I'm curious your thoughts. Bill played in the NBA for 16 years. He was the number one player in the country in college and high school, and I'm curious, Bill, what sorts of routine do you have, and how do you think it led to your success, Bill? Even now, to this day, your creature routine.
Well, my whole life's routine. I like to get up at the same time every day. I like to have the same thing for breakfast. Steve knows I have soup for lunch. I like to eat dinner at 6, probably as I get older, earlier. And I like to go to sleep at the same time. So to me, it's always kind of been like that. To an athlete, you have a routine. So because you want your body not only to perform at the same level, but you want to feel the same. I want that same feeling. And my question to you would be, what's best? Because everybody's different. So do we need 8 to 10 hours of sleep? Because I'm great with 6. Do we need carbs for lunch? Just all those things that makes everybody different and makes them kind of the same. But is there like a perfect time that you should get up? Lunch, dinner, go in the bed. What is the sweet spot of what we should be doing?
Well, I think you make that's a beautiful example. One of the things that I try to stress is that the art of routine is what you do, what it is personally. The fact you eat soup at lunch, for example, is something you do. But the key to your keeping homeostasis, stability, equilibrium in your body is that you do it regularly, that you do it timely. And that's what I learned when I met high performers, interviewed people that were over 100 years old. I noticed that they had a stable physical environment, and they also did things very regularly, but what they did varied. And some of this is our physiology. Now, some of us are larks and some of us are night owls. We have a little bit of a shift to this, but when you look at how the cortisol in your body works, how your glucose works, how there are better times to do things than other times, in general, humans are built that way. And in the morning, for example, by the way, I think I saw a survey that the average, American sleeps about 6 hours and 57 minutes. Okay. So, and I've heard many people say that if I could just sleep 1 hour less, I could own the world, right? Because you have that much more time. But basically, in the morning when one awakens, just doing a routine like you have when you wake at the same time and complete a task, it makes your body and essentially could be a habit. it makes your body actually feel good. It makes you feel accomplished. It actually gives you meaning and purpose, which kind of gives you that, what they call coherence, psychological coherence for the rest of the day. And as you start, cognitive things that are very technical kinds of works, particularly in businesses, or like if you're a coach and you're looking at statistics and trying to set up very technical spreadsheets for that regard, those are great things to do from like 7, 8, or 10, including exercise sometimes can be very good for the body in the morning. Between 10 and 2 o'clock approximately or so, again, this can shift. People are really good at engaging with each other. So this is great times for, let's say, sales, recruiting, certain types of engagement meetings. People are alert. By the time it gets to be about 3 o'clock, okay, and you always wonder about those afternoon games in the NBA. I wonder about performance and the sort. The English are ready to have tea. Why do they have high tea at 3 o'clock? Because the glucose levels are low, the cortisol levels. In the Spanish cultures, they go to sleep. They take a siesta. It was said the French and the Italians have sex. Now all of this is controlled by your hypothalamus in your brain. It controls those centers. And so people sometimes would ask me, well, I'm just not having a very good practice here at 3 o'clock, or I'm trying to get things across. That's not a great time for that. Maybe it's a good time to do innovation and free thinking and the sort. So as the time of day goes, and there are times that are better to do things than other times. And I do think that if you look back, and I can't speak specifically at your playing career and your coaching career, how good you're able to adapt, which is easier to do in your middle years than it is when you're very young or getting older, is one's ability to basically perform. And I've noticed this to be a really important thing. I call it the travel time bubble, because for your experience, for example, where you have traveled and have to go to other time zones immediately, different environments, different locker rooms, different noises, different physical spaces, the ability to perform away, and not every athlete can do that. I've learned that there are some great athletes that can't travel and perform. They can't do, whether it's tennis tournaments or play basketball consistently. Not everyone can do that. They cannot adapt to the circadian rhythms. So how you do that, how you keep things as consistent as you can, the way you were talking about them, is really important in athletic performance and in travel performance.
Now, let me ask you, I have 6 sisters. And I got to tell you, I promise you, they sleep more than me. They love it. So can you tell me are there differences between men and women, especially as they get older? And if they are, what are they?
Well, that's a pretty broad question in the Me Too movement here. So I've got to be pretty careful.
You have to be careful. But I do have 6 sisters,
No,
so I don't think they'll disagree with that.
Well, surely, I think women. Some of the studies have shown, first of all, women are much better able to age gracefully than men. Women live longer than men.
Yeah.
The longest living women tend to be people that are, you might not like this, but of short stature.
And I don't like that.
I don't like that, and are especially the women from Japan, for example, at least historically. These are some data and the sort. But many people, but it's extremely variable, and so sleeping, the amount of sleep that one knows. By the way, it's really interesting. There's a lot behind theories of why we sleep, but nobody really knows why we sleep. We know how we get to sleep and what makes us go to sleep. We know what disturbs us from sleeping, and how to best get to sleep, how we're distracted and the sort. But I think that there is quite a lot of variation. But as you get older, there are some interesting sleeping patterns to the lark and the night owl type of thing. Most people, as they get older, get to be a little bit more larks. They tend to go to sleep earlier. They tend to wake up earlier. So there's some shift that happens in that pattern. But I don't know that there's any hard, specific aspect of of sleep. But we do know this. We do know that sleep and your sleeping patterns, getting the right amount of REM is extremely important for your good health and your ability to function, throughout the rest of the day. And so we know what happens when people are tortured and they're not allowed to sleep, you know. So sleep is essential for humans and for most mammals. But I can't speak specifically because you see great variation, and maybe it's the genetic variation and how, let's say, one gender has sleeping habits relative to another gender.
Yeah, it is interesting because I am not a great sleeper. When I was younger, I feel like I was, but now I think that what happens is that, especially for athletes, you're banged up, so my back's gonna bother me, or my knee, or there's gonna be something hurting that you've got to move around.
Right.
And also, the older I get, I'm a lighter sleeper, so it's really interesting. And the bad thing with me is that I like the night, but I like the mornings.
Right.
And it's really interesting that
Yeah.
those times in the morning I feel really alert.
Hmm.
My mind's really active. My
Right.
thoughts are really good.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's unfortunately it's a contradiction, but I feel great.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I wonder because some people, and there is a whole theory to cat napping in the sort. There were some great nappers that couldn't sleep well. I know I've read about them before a game, for example. You say we're having, and you might have experienced that. Of course, you might have seen some coached or played with people that had this ability to say they weren't good night sleepers. They were night owls. They slept so little, but you noticed that they would get cat naps at certain parts of the day to keep them alert and awake and to perform well. But the morning time, it's interesting. I was just looking, people think that artists or people that are creative aren't routine, and that's not true and not the case. In fact, I was looking at a PBS series on Hemingway, the writer, and how he said exactly what you could have paraphrased. He said those were the times that were most productive for me, where I could work and write in the morning. Things were clear, like you said. My thoughts were clear, and it was quiet. I wasn't bothered. I wasn't distracted by a number of different things. And I think, in athletic performance, and I think about shooting that free throw under pressure. What is pressure? How is it that one can perform as if you're early rising in the morning, and you have the clear thoughts and your clear ability. And some of these motor skills that happen, we've learned a lot about the midbrain and how these things early on, repetitive practice, consistency, and control, come into the midbrain, and they get there very deeply. And your ability to remove other sensory sensations and perceptions and let your midbrain go to work in moments like that are a way that people are taught to remove pressure, whatever it is in performance, in any performance of pressure. So we've learned a lot more interesting things in that regard. Also, I think rituals. I was always curious if you had certain rituals, because good teams develop routines, and then those routines become part of their culture, and their culture helps build the team essence, and that builds rituals. And then things like rhythm, regularity, momentum, which is a curious thing. How does that all happen as a team suddenly? And a lot of this is somewhat, your physiology, your endocrinology. There's some really interesting aspects to that. So I am curious about, if you've experienced some of these rituals or routines or superstitions when you're creating a culture for a team to perform.
Well, I think that there's sports wise, there's a certain psychology to playing and understanding. And to me, it says I have a great belief that people are dying to get beat. You really just have to give them a reason. And also, everything works in contradiction to me. It's the idea that you can't win them all, And I've been on teams that have been 30-0. So you can win them all. And sometimes it's just the idea that and understand that. And it's like a routine of shooting a free throw that you're talking about. Well, the routine is that when you're in practice, you practice like you're in the game. And when you're in the game, you shoot like you're at practice. So it's having that understanding of that routine and that repetition. We were really great at that in Chicago because I promise you, nobody repped an offense as much as we did and practiced it, especially under pressure. So, and also there's a certain psychology into the want of it. You've got to want to be in that situation. You're dying to be it. You've been ready for that since you were 10 years old. Everybody wants to be on base, last of the night, 2 away, bases loaded. I want to be up, or I want to be the pitcher, and I want to be on the free throw line. So you're prepared for it. You've been waiting for it your whole life, and you should thrive in that situation. So there's a certain routine, there's a certain psychology that you're prepared for that from the start of the season. We're prepared for pressure. We're prepared to win a championship. I think more teams than not just talk about winning. We want to win. Well, we want to win a championship, and this is how we're going to do it. So it's that routine, that thought.
Yeah, that's my thoughts exactly. And the reason besides having that will and that want to do it, it was that continuous repetition, the way you did things, the way and teams are different, how they set up and begin the how they come on the court, who starts the layup drills, where you move to the layup drills and to other drills, and how organized you are in that regard. And doing that type of piece over and over again, and the rituals, that builds meaning, purpose, and confidence just in itself. I remember I hated running lines, when I did a little bit of that when I played a little bit of basketball. I can't play basketball much now. I hate it, but after a while, I recognized there was a different purpose to that than just warming up or being fast. There was more to that piece where I began to look forward to it, where it made me feel good to do it, and I knew that was going to help me have a better performance. And if somebody disrupted that routine, if somebody disrupts that rhythm, that piece, and then you see where people start to have difficulty in performing. We're adaptable animals, but we love having a stable environment. We always seek it. That's the great hope. It's all in us. Our physiology is to do that, to find stability, and to perform highly because of it.
Yeah, and it's similar to, even if we are ready to play, we can mess it up, but we understand what happened and we adapt. It's like being in a band. Exactly. You may miss a chord. If I play the guitar, believe me, I'm going to miss a couple, but I can adapt because I played enough to know how to adapt to the mistakes. And it's just keep moving forward that way is all part of that same routine. So if you can imagine, if you're to play and somebody misses a line, it's okay, because we know we can adapt. Right. The routine of it is so really important. And Steve and I talk about all the time about when we don't feel good. And you only know you don't feel good when you don't feel good, because I feel good most of the time, but it's being able to adapt. I'm not feeling great. Maybe I'm gonna get on top of it early, take some medicine with me, a shot of scotch, and I'm good to go.
Right.
But it just keeps you balanced. That's why I really love the idea of a routine.
Yeah, and I think my big point is that it's within our human nature. It's how our bodies work. In today's world, it's very easy to get distracted, disrupted, and people that have problems, that have disease, behavioral issues, or otherwise, what we do in medicine is we put them in a cocoon. We put them in the hospital. We put them in a behavioral health setting. We start to get their timeliness together. When you see people that are disrupted, they do not have an ability to do anything. You know, those kind of teams that don't practice well, don't warm up well, the individuals that make up those teams that don't do that. And so this is part, I think, of our human nature. And I'm trying to stress now that having that routine and doing it regularly may be more important than what it is you do. In other words, I learned that from the people that were, over 100 years old. One of them said to me, I have a scotch every day at 5 p.m.
Oh, wow. Good man.
And she was 102 years old. And some of the things we consider maybe not healthy, but the fact that she did that regularly. Another would say, well, I have beef every Wednesday, every Saturday, every Tuesday, and they did it regularly and on time. And this is what I found to be the common trend of people who live long. And then, recently, and in the book, The Art of Routine, I talk about the Rolling Stones, who are septuagenarians now. They're in their 70s. I think some might be in their 80s. They've been performing for 55 years on the road. We had an opportunity in the book to interview their choreographer and talk to some of them. And we found some really interesting things about how were they able to perform so well, travel from one venue to another venue and do this. And it's interesting because in today's times, when they travel, they have to have their backstage look exactly the same. They take their backstage with them. It's kind of like you'd be taking your basketball court and everything with you, right? In essence, you do a few other things to stabilize your environment, and for example, in sports. But in their art, they have their backstages exactly the same, where their dressing rooms are, what they look like, some of the things that are some of their own memorabilia or things that make them feel good come with them. When they arrive they begin a very processed routine. It's all timed. You'd think that the creative aspects just kind of happen out of nowhere, but in fact, to perform, they have very specific times from the moment they arrive to talking to people in a very specific time about what the town's about, so they could say, hello, Cleveland, or whatever, and say something that they know, to the exact timing that they rehearse, practice, do sound checks, to the time that Mick Jagger for 45 minutes warms up at that age, and then has another 30 minutes of vocal warm up to exactly to the time that they hit the stage at 9 o'clock, just as one example. And I would think that as a coach, that type of structure, that type of organization, and taking a group of people to perform is very similar to what, if you look, you've done that, and you've done it even naturally, even maybe you didn't think about it, but you've done that naturally to perform well.
Well, I've had great examples of what to do, especially in basketball. So I've had so many great coaches and mentors to go off of. And let me ask you a question. So in this pandemic, what do you think has been the toughest on people's routine, kids and adults?
Well, like I talk about the time bubble. I talk about how we're born in a womb. It's real stable, and then we're thrown out in the world, and then we go out to try to find stability and survive. And I think this pandemic, with the rules that were applied, completely burst everybody's time bubble. People have had to re-look at their routines. For example, one of the big issues was the childcare centers were closed, and childcare centers are where the moms can go to work in today's world, where there's two working families, two working individuals in the family. And suddenly, in fact, we had an issue at some of the hospitals that I work with. I'm still involved in the healthcare side, of course, and we couldn't get nurses because they had to make a choice between going to the hospital or taking care of their kids, because there was no daycare or nowhere to take care of their kids. It became a very, especially early on, a very difficult issue to solve in the COVID pandemic as we went into shelter in place. Others, depending, I've heard some people who've had personalities like often you do tests whether you're a more internalized personality. Some people have told me, I love this because I'm not that much of being out with people, and I've loved now being home and just working from home and and doing these Zoom calls. My work is, so they've been that way, but people generally seem to be social. And suddenly we stopped having people from being able, not only having others having disease, but take, for example, family and parents being separated, not able to see each other, the kids, the grandkids, let alone what happened with the elderly who were locked in. The way they survive in some of these institutions and these care centers is by socializing. Suddenly, they can't even socialize with each other. They're in a room with somebody bringing them some food, and their families can't visit them. That is that was a kind of a formula for death. That's a prescription for death right there. It's someone who's elderly. So you've had all of this, what I call collateral damage that's happened. But kind of like the moonshot, I think, like when we went to the moon, there were a whole bunch of things that came out of it that we learned from it. And I think today there are some collateral values that have come from it. I mean, some have been that in our busy worlds, families really were never forced to be together inside of a room, to actually interact. They're just too busy moving about, taking their kids here or there, or, depending on your social status, your ability. It became, suddenly they were forced to be in an environment, like I used to talk about, that in humans adapting, if you take two people that hate each other and you put them in a jail cell, over time they'll learn to adapt and how to get along, right? Well, we were kind of forced into this, and we began to see some of the value at being for some of us, with our families, where we maybe missed others we couldn't. We found solace in that. And then our bubbles burst, so we had to develop new routines, because suddenly we weren't going out to eat or go have coffee or, travel like we did. And we had to figure out, how do we eat out? How do we take out? How do we eat in? How do we survive? And people have done this for years. If you look at the Myanmar crisis, with the Rohingya people, or the Syrian crisis, or humans that have been through war and pestilence that have to leave their environments and find new environments to survive. This is, in essence, pestilence. It's disease. We, in very wealthy society, not all of us, but wealthier societies compared to 100 years ago, are having to learn how to resurvive and learn our way through. So a lot of good things have happened. One of them that we began to appreciate our environment. Suddenly, sometimes homes are places you move through, and you don't have to stay in, and you just sleep and back to work. Suddenly people kind of looked at their couches and they go, well, Jesus criminy, I can't believe that couch. I haven't switched that couch out. Now I'm having to sit in it and spend time in it. Maybe I have to do something about it. So we began to appreciate more, I think, our shelter. We began to appreciate more our family. This is collateral values. We become appreciate being away from each other. And that's something we're going to have to learn to go back to, because everybody's like a viral threat. Now when I look now, as the vaccines are going, and I watch just people or NBA basketball, and see people being able to hug each other, and shake hands again, and be careful. Us overcoming, everyone's like a viral threat. So how are we going to overcome that? How are we going to? Some people have a very hard time with that issue, particularly people that have been older or more vulnerable, or have had family members that have been damaged or died due to COVID. So it's a very interesting time. And I do think that the moonshot things, like these Zoom calls that we're doing, although people are getting Zoom fatigue and they're missing being and seeing people, being able to see their expressions, their body language. You can't see my hands. This is natural, what we do when we read people and how they are. They're missing some of that, but we're learning how to be more virtual, how to have remote presence. And we're learning that we can work a bit out of being in large offices with lots of people, and we can still be somewhat productive. So it's going to be a very interesting time as we recover.
I think it's more than just an interesting time. I think that people are going to realize that a lot of these things people could do without, right? So That's what I think. I feel like, people rediscover, like, do they really need to go to an office, to work? And so I think it's partly what you said, like people might still see people as other threats, a viral threat, but they also may realize, like, why am I spending 2 hours commuting every day to be in an office with people? So we learn to make a virtue a necessity. And I think a lot of this will stay. And we realize, like, this is indeed a better routine, not to spend 2 hours in traffic, to spend more time with your family. Because, you talked about these septuagenarians, or even what's the word for 100-year-old centenarians? They also, in addition to the routine, I think they live long because of their relationships. They're not lonely. They have a lot of people around them. So I think that will enhance the quality of people's life. Don't you? Like, it makes a better routine. It's a long way of saying, right. I think we realize there's a better routine out there.
Yeah. And at Yale University, they teach a course on happiness, and one of the techniques is, and I think to your point, what we're learning is we're without many of these other things, we are learning to savor other things, the relationship with families, or in fact, some of the techniques are like, the way to become happy is to savor a little bit more, take a little more time doing the things that make you happy, like a good meal or a long shower, just as ways of getting it. So I think we have so much distraction, so much content, that we can't just focus on a routine or things we do in those routines that we can savor, that can make us in fact happy. And I think this has allowed you're right, this has allowed us to do more of that.
Well, Adil, thank you so much for coming on. It was great. I will look forward to your book. Now, how can we get your book?
Well, The Art of Routine's coming out on May 18th, and it's on Amazon, and it's on Barnes and Nobles. Skyhorse Publishing is the publisher. They have a publishing page along with Simon and Schuster, and I've got handles that are on Facebook and Twitter under Dr. I or Angel Iscovich or angeliscovich.com, and hopefully people will find the book to have a somewhat of an interesting insight in nature. And being a caregiver, I'm hoping that they'll find some good care from it and some help.
I'm really looking forward to it. I'll make sure Steve buys at least 5 or 6 copies of it.
Please do.
Yes.
Well, thank you again.
I'll give it to all of your friends, Bill.
Well, thank you. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you so much.